Hello, people. Welcome back to another awesome anime review from yours truly, Chad Marco. I hope you guys have been enjoying your summer. I certainly have. So, as you can see, today I will be reviewing a anime mecha classic, Gundam Wing. I finally got Gundam Wing under my belt. I've lost track of all the Gundam series I've watched thus far. I'll go and look at my anime list to see exactly what I've gone through thus far. But I felt like I had to watch Wing because it's one of the most talked about, popular series in the Gundam franchise. So I finally got a chance to check it out. It took me a while to finish watching it, but I finally got through it, and so now I will be reviewing it right after I get comfortable here. Give me a second. Okay, let's spin this TV around. So look, there we go. Oh yeah, this is good. This is it. Okay, so let's get into just some of the minor details about it, right? So Gundam Wing is a mecha anime released in 1995, and it was created by Sunrise Studios. It's the sixth series in the main line, and of course, they tend to be loosely related or not at all related. Just depends, right? So if you didn't know, Gundam is about, well, typically it's about warring military factions on Earth and in space who utilize big bipedal robots for combat, with the Gundams in particular always being a cut above the rest. So much so that they are typically the deciding factor in most major conflicts. Now, something that I found interesting when I was checking out the Wikipedia page preparing for this review was that while the series fared, or rather, this is a direct quote from Wikipedia. So it says, while the series fared modestly well in Japan, it found greater success in the United States and popularized the Gundam franchise in the West. I had no idea Gundam Wing is really what made Gundam popular in the West. I thought maybe it was G Gundam, because G Gundam was so different and I guess you could say easier to digest for the attention deficit. Oh man, but I love G Gundam. But anyway, I had no idea that was the case though, but it was just a little fun fact that I found on the Wikipedia page. So let's talk about the plot. So, in Gundam Wing, the people of Earth have long since ventured out into space and began creating and settling into massive, thriving space colonies. And it's reached a point where the space colonies and people of Earth are pretty much divided as if they were two separate entities. Imagine how America and China relate to one another. We share the same Earth, but operate as separate powers. That's pretty much how it is between the space colonies and the people of Earth. Except the space colonies are largely peaceful. They don't have a lot of military strength because there simply isn't much use for it, because there hasn't been many major conflicts in space. I mean, you kind of got to think about it, because just the way a space colony would work, right? You can't afford to have big explosions and bombs going off in a space colony, because that means everybody dies. And I would assume that's part of the reason why there hasn't been a lot of wars in the space amongst the space colonies, because you simply can't afford to. You have to maintain the peace, or everybody's gonna fucking die. It's a space colony. So, seeing an opportunity to expand its power, the UESA, or United Earth Sphere Alliance, begins to send military forces into space to try to establish control over the space colonies, even if it means using violent force, which of course the space colonies don't take very well. But because the space colonies don't have a strong military force of their own, the top scientists of the various oppressed colonies use their genius to develop the Gundams, which are mechs with extraordinary combat potential, as well as train 5 young men to pilot them. So once the time is right, all at once, 5 Gundam pilots are sent down from the colonies down to Earth to fight back against their oppressors. And that's pretty much the gist of the plot. Of course, it gets far more complicated than that, but I don't need to go all into that now. I'm not going to go too deep into the plot. I just want to give a summary. It does get fairly complex, but what I will say is that within the UESA, there is a separate faction called Oz, or Romefeller, that turns out to be the driving force behind the increased military pressure placed on the space colonies. Because really, the Earth Alliance isn't just this big evil force. It's more so Oz that's leading the charge towards space dominance. And there's a part early in the story where you see them orchestrating the assassination of leaders within the alliance who promote peace instead of military expansion. And going even further along, you'll see infighting within Oz and even the space colonies to an extent. So it gets pretty crazy, but that's the skinny of it. But I guess you could say the plot is pretty much Oz and Romefeller versus the United Earthsphere Alliance versus the space colonies. So that's the plot summed up. Next, I'm going to discuss the various characters of Gundam Wing. So stay tuned. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss the various characters of Gundam Wing. And starting off with the protagonist, who is Hiro Yui, and he pilots the Wing Gundam. Like I said, he's the protagonist. And it's worth mentioning that all the Gundam pilots are around the age of, I think they're like 14 to 16. So, you know, typical anime shit, right? So early on, Hiro is portrayed as being absolutely cold-blooded and almost disturbingly focused on completing his objectives. And it's worth mentioning, even though Hiro and the other pilots share the same mission, they're not exactly a team, at least not from the start. And Hiro, more so than the others, is more unwilling to play buddy-buddy with them until he absolutely has to, which is to say he's not very friendly. The thing about Hiro, though, is that he honestly comes across as being very mentally traumatized. Excuse me. Like, I don't know what kind of training he went through, but you get the sense that he never really had much of a childhood or went through a healthy process of growing into adolescence. His personality is pretty much exactly what you would imagine would happen when you take a child and mold him into being a killer capable of taking on serious life or death missions. I mean, he just straight up seems imbalanced, but also very good at what he does and goes about things in a somewhat like robotic, programmed way. And he is, his character kind of rubs me the wrong way a couple times. So just for example, there are these moments in the anime where he's talking to the female love interest, and he's like, "I'll kill you," right? Because maybe she saw too much or some shit like that. But then it's like he's trying to be so edgy, but then he can't even bring himself to. He's always talking about killing this girl, but he never does shit. You know, and so that's why some of his edginess just comes across as being corny to me. Really early on, I can't say that I particularly like this character, but he does become more likable towards the end. I will give him that. Because like I said, the whole edgy thing is just a setup for his eventual character development. Um, Over the course of the story, you see him warm up a bit more to the people around him. He begins embracing the idea of working as a team, expressing himself, and even developing a bit of a romantic relationship with Relena, who I'll discuss her later. Now, like I said, I tend not to like characters like Hero. I like a bit of edge, but he's too edgy even for me to get behind. And I think really part of it is his obvious inner conflict, where you can tell he's trying to be more cold hearted than he's actually capable of being. You know, I'll kill you, I'll kill you, Relena, but never doing a damn thing. Um, but overall, the payoff towards the end, where you see him mature and develop those leadership qualities, really makes it all worth it. So I think he's a well written character, but certainly not appealing to me, and wouldn't be appealing to some other folks as well. So the next character is Duo Maxwell. Hold up. And he pilots the Gundam Death Scythe. With Duo, what stands out about him is that it seems like he gets a bit too much satisfaction out of destroying his enemies. With him, he doesn't seem as detached as some of the other pilots who just look at it as carrying out a mission objective. You can tell he really enjoys the thrill of battle and just loves killing shit. So one thing that duo and hero have in common is that they are both pretty edgy. Like they're edgelord type characters. But I would say the difference is that Duo doesn't seem as mentally disturbed. Outside of his bloodlust, he's actually relatively normal and very much capable of handling interpersonal relationships in a fairly mature way. He's one of those guys who's more open to working as a team, and he's really the most fun-loving, laid-back, jovial one of the group. The one you can expect to make jokes or say something funny, but on the battlefield, he's a straight-up Grim Reaper. I mean, they don't call him Death Sight for nothing. I mean, he just be slashing and slicing and dicing. He don't give a fuck, man. Um, Now, one thing I found interesting, I did some research and I found out that Duo was actually intended to be the protagonist at one point, but he got replaced by Hero. And it really makes sense because he does have a personality more fitting of a typical anime protagonist, if you ask me. Maybe tone down the edgy, I want to slice everybody in half thing. But dude, tell me, anyone who's seen this, tell me his the way he looks, his personality, I can totally see him leading, being the protagonist of his own Gundam series. I can totally see it, so it makes sense. But I do like him as a character. His gregariousness is a nice counterbalance to Hero and Troa and Wu Fei's more introverted demeanor, and I'm gonna get to them next. Let me get a sip of water though. So the next Gundam pilot I'm gonna talk about is Troa Barton. He pilots the Gundam Heavy Arms. So here's another fucked up kid. He's fucked up. Troa is he's definitely one of the more mentally disturbed pilots. Him and Hero have that in common, just in different ways. I would say Troa is even more withdrawn than Hero, but you also get the sense that there's a more obvious vulnerability to him. Like he's as strong as a cannon, but also as easy to break as glass. He doesn't really show the same lust for battle that Duo does, nor does he display the same level of attachment to his mission as Hero, or he doesn't have that pride as a warrior like Wu Fei. I mean, even though he carries out his orders, he seems almost puppet-like in his execution of things. Early in the story, he begins traveling with a circus as a cover for his activities, and he ends up forming a bond with the owner and one of the girls that works there. And they sort of act as a catalyst for him to open up more, but also I believe they gave him more of a reason to fight, something to protect. And he also becomes somewhat close with Quattro, one of the other pilots. So I feel like Trowa's development is similar to Hero in that he needed to find people he could connect with, which would help him find more of a reason to put his life on the line beyond following orders. And just as a side note, because I've played Gundam Battle Assault 2, and I've used him a couple of times. And the thing about his character in the fighting game is that his Gundam has all these fucking guns. Like he can shoot missiles and machine guns and all that shit. But once you run out, you ain't got shit. Like his character depends so much on having ammunition. But that's just I love that game. So the next one is Quattro, and he pilots Gundam Sandrock. Now, Quattro is probably the most normal out of the bunch. Early on, he's introduced as having already linked up with a squad of mobile suits from what I believe is like his homeland on Earth or something like that. He has like a whole team with him, even before linking up with the other Gundam pilots. And he's the one who was always pushing for them to work as a team, even from the very beginning. And he doesn't really have much issue expressing himself or connecting with others. Now, he does have a bit of a breakdown in the middle of the story. Friender, shut the fuck up. but overall, he remained fairly balanced throughout. I would say his most noticeable deficiency is that he's kind of passive and lacks the strength and leadership skills necessary to rally the other pilots around him. Because, like I said, he's the one that really wants to work as a team. He's probably the most team-minded person out of the group, but he doesn't have that strength and leadership quality to him to where he can successfully bring them together, at least not early on. And even on the battlefield, he always seemed like the weakest. Certainly not weak, but his overall strength never stood out like the rest. He never had like that one battle that I was like, yo, yeah, this is it. But his overall grounded disposition is kind of like the glue that helps keep the other more wild personalities together. And I think him just being so sensible and emotionally available is his true contribution to the team. Friender is licking something. Oh, okay. He's just licking his arm. He was licking viciously. Okay. So next I'm gonna talk about Wu Fei. And he pilots the Shenlong Gundam, I believe. Might have got that wrong. It's alright. Now, this is my personal favorite Gundam pilot and even character from the whole series. His whole mentality is that of a true warrior. His mindset is one of proving himself worthy of life through fighting and surviving battles. Like the other pilots, he has a mission to adhere to, but it's obvious that fighting for him is deeper than just a means to accomplish the goals of his superiors. It's a way of proving himself as the strongest. Now, some of the other pilots seem a bit off mentally, but I never got that feeling from Wu Fei. While he was certainly still in the process of self-discovery like the other pilots, his personal goals and way of dealing with the others pretty much remained the same throughout. His issue was losing faith in himself and no longer seeing himself as worthy after suffering what he perceived to be a humiliating defeat by the hands of Trace. So his whole character arc was mostly about getting back in tune with himself and what he believed in and acting according to his own sense of justice. And that really kind of resonated with me because that's been my recent struggle. Even, like, I'm not a fucking Gundam pilot, but grappling with your own self-confidence, and finding the confidence to act according to your own beliefs in a world where you have so many opposing sides and viewpoints. That can be a difficult thing to do. And, seeing his little character arc there kind of gave me a bit of it added a bit of fuel to my flame. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, yeah, like this is my guy right here. But the funny thing about Wu Fei is that it took them the longest time to get him on board with the rest of the crew. He's immensely prideful and has this me against the world attitude, but a lot of that stems from his desire to prove himself, which oftentimes means fighting alone. And it's not until the very end that he realizes that he needs the others to defeat his greatest enemy. Who's next? All right, so now we have Relena. So Relena is the obligatory female love interest. I hate to always say it like that, but sometimes it just seems like they don't really put a lot of effort into creating these characters sometimes. But I would say Relena is probably one of the better ones because she does have a prominent role throughout. But, they had to give Hero a little girlfriend. Even though he does spend half the anime plotting to kill her. But so Relena is the daughter of one of the leaders of the UESA. And her father has always been one of the men who promoted ideas of peace and pacifism. So she shares in a lot of his ideas and ways of thinking. Now, early on, I didn't really understand what her role was. In fact, I would say she seemed like one of the most misplaced characters throughout the series because the entire time she's trying to promote these ideas of pacifism in the middle of a global / intergalactic war. So it kind of seemed like there really wasn't a place for her outside of her connection to Hero. But now looking back at it, it makes sense because the entire goal of the colonies, Gundam pilots, and even some of the people of Earth, of the Earth Spirit Alliance, was ultimately peace. And she sort of represented that desire throughout the course of events and even managed to gain a fair bit of power and influence towards the end. But yeah, she's Hero's, love interest. What do you expect? So the next character is Zex, and he pilots the Tallgeese as well as the Epion Gundam. So Zex is the Char clone of the series. Now, if you don't know, going back to the first Gundam series, there was a character, the very first, I'm talking 1970, right? Amuro and them niggas. But seriously, going back to the very first Gundam series, there was a character named Char who was an ace pilot allied with Zion, the principal of Zion. I'm thinking about Zion Williams, but Zeon, the bad guys. And ever since then, it's kind of been a tradition of Gundam to include a character who is very similar to Char in almost as like Gundam pilot or some shit like that. And you can always recognize him because he would have the trademark mask. Like, maybe he won't have the same kind of mask, but he'll have some type of mask. And his character would typically switch sides throughout or never really be firmly allied with either side. And he's always portrayed as being something of a maverick ace pilot. But during the early parts of Gundam Wing, Zex is allied with Oz, the bad guys, of course, and he's highly valued for his exceptional combat skills. And it's later revealed, though, that he is the lost brother of Relena. Now, I like Zex. I think he's one of the characters that helps keep things interesting. Particularly because he's one of the few pilots who can actually give the Gundams a challenge early on. And like I said, he tends to be rather independent and unpredictable. So you can always depend on him to stir things up. Whenever he's around, it's like he just helps keep shit interesting. Like you need a character like that. Like he's there just to fuck shit up. Just someone that's powerful, has influence, and you can't really control him. And that's what's cool about Zex. So next we have Trace Kusranada. He pilots Gundam Epion and Tall Geese. Him and Zex be passing them motherfuckers around. So Trace is who you could consider to be the big bad of the series. I believe he was the leader of the Oz faction, or at least one of his major players who orchestrated the coup d'etat of the UESA and the plan to enforce rule over the space colonies. He's not your typical main villain. It's not as if he's going around doing recklessly evil deeds like a maniac. Despite his love and fascination for war and shit, he still does everything in sort of an organized and even somewhat honorable way. Like there's one point where he engages in a duel with Wu Fei, manages to get the better of him, but shows him mercy out of respect. He also has a fairly close relationship with Zex, probably because they're both exceptional pilots who like to do things their own way and have a sense of personal honor and pride regarding the battlefield. That whole I love war thing. But the thing about Trace is that his motivations always seem kind of vague to me. He almost comes across as like a child playing with his army toys, Not to say that he doesn't value the lives of those around him, because they do demonstrate that a few times throughout the series, but it's almost like he enjoys war for war's sake rather than having a good reason for setting these events in motion. And I think that's one of the things I just didn't like about him. It was like okay, well, but why? you love war, but why? So those are the major players. Now there are some notable mentions, some other characters who are notable mentions, like Dorothy. She's the daughter of Duke Dermel. Duke Dermel is the one of the leaders of Romefeller. Really, you could say he's another one of the main bad guys, so to speak. But he's really kind of boring, so I don't want to talk about him. But she's the daughter of Duke Dermel, and she kind of acts as sort of an opposite to Relena. Relena is always promoting peace, and Dorothy, I wouldn't say she promotes war, but she embraces it. But at the same time, she kind of sponsors or endorses Relena, and I guess she has like a fascination with Relena, because even though they have kind of opposing viewpoints, she still admires Relena in her own way. Then there's Lady Une. She's like Trace Kusranada's like right hand lady. She's one who's kind of she's just crazy, bro. she's crazy, and like she's really one of the more overtly evil characters in the whole series. Like, with Trace, it's like you don't really see him get his hands dirty, but Lady Une is like his dirty hand. I guess you could put it like that. You don't really see Trace get his hands dirty too much, but at the same time, he's always in Lady Une's ear, and she's the one doing all of the dirty, underhanded, evil things. At least early in the series, where she's more prominent. But she's actually a good character, like a good evil character, because you don't really have a lot of like overtly evil characters in this, but she's definitely one of them, at least before she has like that personality change shit. But if you ever watch it, you'll see what that is. And then there's also Noin, and I guess you could say she's like what Lady Une is to Trace, but for Zex. That's like Zex's right hand lady friend. And I'm assuming like she has an attraction to him, and it seems like there might have been some sort of like romantic thing going on there. But they're not as closely tied together as Lady Une and Trey's. You know, Trey's like Une was really just putting in work throughout for Trey's, and Noin was working more closely with Relena and the Gundam pilots, but she always had like a loose connection to Zex because of their past together and whatnot. And like I said, there's Duke Dermel, who is another one of the rare, more overtly evil characters throughout the series. He's the leader of Romefeller, which is like the faction within the UESA that's pushing for, you know, military expansion in space. He's a real asshole. So those were the major players in the series. And next, I'm gonna talk about the good and the bad, and then we're gonna discuss the scores. So stay tuned. Okay, so let's talk about the good first. So one thing I liked about Gundam Wing was that it does a really good job of humanizing the bad guys, and or bad guys. I gotta put it in quotes because sometimes they just really don't seem that evil. And this is something that I've always appreciated about Gundam, is that it's not like the bad guys are just this gang of evil anime mavericks like the Ginyu Fours, or the Band of Seven from Inuyasha, or the Jupan Gatana from Veroni Kenshin. It seems like the writers always put an effort into establishing that even the opposing side have their own beliefs. They have loved ones or limitations that lead them to doing what they do. Certainly we have a few characters who are just straight up evil, like Alex and Mueller and Dermel to an extent. But again, even Dermel, you see he has a daughter and that sort of thing. But then you have guys like Trey's and Zex, and even Lady Une to an extent, who is definitely fucking crazy. But does what she does out of her love and loyalty to Trey's. Whereas Trey's and Zex, you know, they're more level-headed and not overtly evil, and they're just these deep characters who happen to be opposed to the Gundam pilots, the protagonists, the good guys. So another thing I like about it was this Gundam series honestly had some of the best battle sequences I've ever seen throughout the series. And to be honest, sometimes Gundam doesn't have the best battle scenes. If you ask me, G Gundam and Iron Blooded Orphans are some of the standouts, but Wing has some good fights. It's got some good fight scenes like Wu Fei versus Trey's, Hero versus Zex, and Duo versus Clark. It's some good fight. It's some really some of the best Gundam fights I've seen were in this one right here. And lastly, it has solid character development. You know, it's not grade A, but I will give them credit for the character development of the Gundam pilots, particularly Hero and Wu Fei. Seeing Hero become more mature and balanced was satisfying, and seeing Wu Fei become that full-fledged warrior without self-doubt, believing in his own moral compass, that was nice as well. And just generally seeing the boys come together as a team to overcome their greatest enemy. You know, just great stuff all around. So now the bad. So one thing I noticed, and it seemed like this was more prevalent early on, but maybe I just stopped paying attention. But early on, I noticed they recycled a lot of animations, which I guess you got to kind of expect that from mecha anime, you know, because of it can be pretty. I would assume that it's harder to draw like big mechs with these complicated designs than just a regular character. And then, so it kind of makes sense why they do that. But I did notice that they were recycling animations quite a bit, especially early on. I think they kind of cut back on that later. But early on, I was like, man, they really making good use of some of these animations here. Um, but just a minor gripe. But here's the main thing I didn't like about it. This is what really hurt the score of this game this anime for me. The middle part of the series was kind of boring, and to me, I thought it was lacking meaningful direction. So, like I said, I think this is what hurt the series the most. The beginning and the end are the strongest parts to me, right? So it's a 49 episode anime. And I would say the beginning and the end are the strongest. But there's about a 15 episode stretch, more or less, where it just seems like the plot wasn't really going in any meaningful direction. I think maybe it started around episode 20, or maybe a little bit before that. It could have been maybe episode 20 through 30-ish, something like that. It's roughly around that spot. Because that's really what made me take so long to finish it. Was that dry spot in the middle where it started off so good, or at least it started off fairly good. Like, it kept my interest. But it seemed like during the middle, its hooks just came out of me. And then it kind of came back right later, around episode 35, 33, some around in the early 30s or something. And I think the reason why, as far as the actual plot, this was the point where the colonies weren't really all that concerned with retaining their independence anymore, and were warming up to the idea of being the Earth's ass slaves. Like Treize had sent Lady Une to space and made her the Earth's ambassador, and she somehow did this transformation where she turned into this angel. Not literally, but she was an evil bitch. And then she let her hair down and changed her personality, and she was able to win over the hearts of the people of the colony. And so now they weren't really behind the Gundam pilots anymore. The Gundam pilots were kind of at a loss as far as what to do. Troa had amnesia. Duo found a girlfriend. Wu Fei was just completely MIA. I almost forgot about him. And Hero was just all over the place. Quatrain was just trying to find everybody. Oh man. And even Treize was on house arrest because he relinquished his power in Oz as Romefeller took over. I mean, it was just a mess. And, looking back, it made sense because that whole middle section, as much as I don't like it, that was the point where you really start to see the character development. That just everything being so messy forced them to go within themselves and have these experiences of growth, right? So looking back, I understand the value of that part, but I just don't think it was really done well, because it's they almost I'm not going to say the plot hit a standstill, but it was just really, it was the Gundam pilots more than anyone else had lost their way. And when you're watching an anime or a movie or just anything, you're behind the protagonist and their journey. And you always want to see them making gradual progress towards some kind of end, towards some type of victory or something. And it's that middle part, they had no direction. There were still moving parts. The story was still moving forward, but it's it was moving forward without them. And I think that's what made that part so boring to me, to be honest, was because it just seemed like everything was happening around them, as opposed to them being the ones who were enforcing and making things change by force. Because initially, in the beginning of the anime, these motherfuckers come from space in Gundams, like the most powerful mobile suits you could possibly find anywhere, and they're just attacking all these random military bases and shit, and no one can stop them. They're just causing ruckus all over the earth, and Oz and Romefeller and the Earth Alliance, they're trying to scramble and try to stop these, but like that was exciting. Like they were moving forward, they were forcing the action. And in the middle, just everything got so messy. Like mobile suits got pretty much damn near destroyed or were rendered inoperable. They were split up, and some guys were in space and some were on Earth. It was just so messy, man. And it's like they were no longer the force of change in the world that they were in the beginning. And then of course there's a point where they kind of start to get back on their legs and join up again, and then things start moving in a more interesting direction. But that little part, that like 10 to 15 episode stretch in the middle is what hurts it the most to me. So let's get to the score, right? So for the story, I give it a 2.5 out of 5. I would say the story is actually pretty average, and I would say it had the potential to be like a 3 out of 5. But that part in the middle is just hurts it a lot for me. Like that, oh man, is and even then, the story really ain't that great if you ask me. Things get better as the plot accelerates towards the end, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a good story. It's okay. The action, I'll give it a 3 out of 5. There's plenty of action, and like I said before, this Gundam has some of the best fight scenes and battle sequences, wars, all out wars in space and on land. This Gundam is definitely on point with the action sequences. As far as the animation, you always got to take the time into consideration. Like this came out in the 90s, so I don't expect too much. For the 90s, I would give it a 3 out of 5 for a 90s anime, because there's very little quality to speak of. The only thing I really noticed that was bad was like I said, those reused animations and whatnot. But for the 90s, this was definitely on point as far as the overall animation quality and whatnot. There wasn't any real noticeable quality moments. But again, not exactly spectacular either. Just it's good. The music, I give it a 3 out of 5. The OST is actually pretty good. I like the opening theme. Wait, which one though? Because there was, I think, because they had 2 different opening themes, right? I think I like both of them, and even some of the songs just throughout the whole anime. This Gundam actually has a good OST. I would give it a 3 out of 5. It's a good OST. Comedy, 1 out of 5. Just, and again, not really a knock against it, because it's not a comedy anime, but I always got to bring that up, if it does have comedy elements. The only bit of comedy or hijinks you might see would be from Duo, because he's like, he's kind of wisecracking, joking, laid back guy, right? So you will get a little bit of that from him. But pretty much everyone else is completely serious business throughout. Duo is like the only clown that you will see throughout. And Ichi, a fat 0 out of 5. I mean, there's no sexy sex to speak of whatsoever throughout the whole anime. I mean, you got some cute girls, cute, strong female leads like you would expect from Gundam, like Noin, Une, Relena, whatnot. But that's about it, So overall, I would give Gundam a 7 out of 10. It's good. Gundam Wing, I should say. I give Gundam Wing a 7 out of 10. It's good. I would say that overall is good. I felt like the middle was kind of weak. If it wasn't for that, I could probably give it a 7.5. Maybe even an 8. I could see this like potentially being like an 8 like a 7.5 to an 8. But that middle part just really hurt it for me. And so I had to just, and honestly, I was thinking about giving it a 6. Like when I was around like episode 35, I was like, yo, this shit really not. But it really redeemed itself towards the end. Like after like that last stretch, I was really getting back into it. I was like, yo, this shit getting good. And that's what really saved it for me. I was about to give it a 6. I'm like, yo, this shit about to be a 6. Like they about to be mad. But that last part, I was like, yo, this shit is dope. It just kept getting better and better. And so I would say if you never watched Gundam, if you've never seen a Gundam series, this would be a good place to start to get an idea of what it's about. It might be like going back to Mobile Suit Gundam, the first series, or Zeta Gundam, or Double Z. What is it? Double Z Gundam, Triple Z? I don't know. But going back to like the first 3 or 4 series might be a bit too dated for the casual anime fan. I think for someone just trying to get into Gundam, this is probably a good starting point. Gundam, I would say this is a solid starting point for the neophyte trying to get into Gundam. Because they do have like movies that kind of, they do have movies based on like the first 1 or 2 Gundam series, like so you don't have to go back and watch the whole series. You can just watch like the compressed version of it, the movie version of it. If you don't want to go all the way back and watch those older ones, you can just watch like one of the movies or something that kind of sum it all up. But if you want to just, if you're new to Mobile Suit Gundam, I would say this is like a good one to just kind of hop in there, because this kind of gives you a taste. Like with Gundam Wing, what you see is what you get. This is about what you could expect from the Gundam series. You know, I've always felt like overall, most of them tend to hover around the 7 out of 10 area in terms of quality. And every now and then you'll get an exceptional one that's like an 8. And then you might have like a kind of whack one that's like a 6. But that's usually where it hovers. So I hope you guys enjoyed the anime review. And I will have more of it for you guys soon. So stay tuned and enjoy your life. Make the most of it. See you later, Space Cowboy. Bam. Row, row, fight the power. See you guys.